two kids doing homeschool and another one doing kindy and me sewing at the end of the kitchen table. So it was interesting. But I think after last year, my husband and I just sat down and we sort of thought that that it was okay for me to say no to something. Because things are just getting a little bit insane in terms of the amount of work and the quantities that people wanted and when they wanted them. So, learning to say no has definitely been a real challenge. So.
You're not still doing all the sewing yourself, Louise, are you?
No. So my sister is, my lovely sister is part-time surgeon, part-time nappy sewer.
Wow.
And we also have another couple
This is quite the talented family.
Part-time surgeon, part-time nappy sewer. It's just wonderful. And have you been able to tap in some... Caterpillar, how's it going? I mean, how's the business?
It is great. It is more than... it's taken on a life of its own, and it's definitely more than I expected it to be. But, it keeps us entertained, and it helps pay the mortgage, and... Yeah, it's a great work-life balance. It means that I can take the kids to gymnastics, and I'm supposed to be taking my son to volleyball right now, but I get to do other bits and pieces with them and still be at home, be a mum at home as well, which is it's a tricky balance, but it's a lovely opportunity.
Lovely to have you on the panel, Louise. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's Louise Mongrassi there, based in Brightwood and Nelson. Isn't it just wonderful, Nikki, the small ideas people come up with, and you just see it growing and growing, and there'll be challenges along the way, of course.
Yeah, it's lovely, that one, actually. And because I'm a sewer, I am looking at that and thinking, how long does it take them to sew one of those nappies? And could I make money out of that? I don't think so. I'm way too slow.
Wonderful. So. Nikki Bazant, Zaina Jalila, thank you both for being with us this afternoon. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow. A lot of talk about the world. We'll come back to the world story in the week. Thank you.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, the firm gets a monumental serve. Prince Harry and Meghan lay it all out there in a 2-hour interview. Allegations of racism, life-threatening cries for help ignored, the royal coffers snapping shut, and Prince Charles cutting his son off. Can the palace simply keep calm and carry on now? There's enough Pfizer for the whole team of 5 million. The government reveals it's bought up in bulk, but don't line up just yet. There's still no complete list of who gets the jab and exactly when. A flight attendant is our latest community COVID case. So why don't all Air New Zealand international crew have to self-isolate when they land back at home? And the COVID dance party experiment.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The government has pre-ordered enough Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine doses to guarantee that every New Zealander can be vaccinated against COVID-19. An advance purchase agreement for another 8.5 million doses has been signed, bringing the total number of doses ordered to 10 million, enough for 5 million people to receive their 2 doses. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the Pfizer jab is the first to gain MedSafe approval and will simplify the vaccine rollout.
Whilst the Pfizer vaccine does need to be kept at ultra-cold temperatures, this challenge is offset by only having to deal with one vaccine rather than multiple vaccines with multiple protocols.
Jacinda Ardern says the Pfizer vaccine has been shown to be about 95% effective, and making it the primary provider gives all New Zealanders the chance to have the same vaccine. A vaccinologist says the process of becoming fully protected from COVID-19 takes a month from the time of someone's first vaccine dose, provided they get their second dose on time. The latest community case in Auckland is an Air New Zealand flight attendant who received a first Pfizer vaccine last week, while potentially harbouring the virus. Helen Patousas-Harris says there are 3 weeks between people's first and second doses, and this person hasn't yet had their second.
You're not actually protected straight away. It does take time, and certainly at least a week. And you're actually not going to see full protection until at least a week after your second dose.
Helen Petousis-Harris says the vaccine is not an instant magic bullet but can protect most people. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have sharply criticised Buckingham Palace for a lack of support in a damning interview on US television. The Duchess, Meghan, said she developed suicidal thoughts as a member of the royal family, but her requests for help were denied. The BBC's Grant Ferret has more.
The couple appeared relaxed during the programme recorded in California, but their comments will make the rest of the royal family back in Britain profoundly uncomfortable. The Duchess said Queen Elizabeth had always been wonderful to her, but she hinted at racism in the royal household, saying that when she was pregnant with her first child, there were concerns about how dark the skin of the baby might be. Meghan said she'd experienced suicidal thoughts. She said she thought her death might be the only solution to the growing pressure she and her husband were under.
Grant Ferret in the UK. A report into the care of a woman who gave birth to an underweight baby who later died has found the Bay of Plenty District Health Board failed in its duty of care. The woman was admitted to hospital multiple times during her pregnancy. Emma Hatton reports.
The woman in her 20s suffered severe morning sickness and malnutrition. Her baby was born weighing only 2.5 kilograms and its blood results showed profound hypoglycemia. Health and Disability Deputy Commissioner Rose Wall said the woman was inadequately managed during her pregnancy by her midwife and the DHB's policies after the birth. She said it was not known whether any changes to policy could have prevented the death, but criticised the lack of a plan to manage the complex case. This is Emma Hatton.
A Kinloch farmer has been fined $12,000 for neglecting calves. Anthony Brolly has been sentenced in the Taupo District Court on 7 charges in a case brought by the Ministry for Primary Industries. He's also been ordered to pay more than $5,000 in vet costs. Brolly failed to feed 245 calves, adequately treat and prevent parasites, and ill-treated another 5 animals. Official figures show pedestrians and cyclists are disproportionately injured and killed on Wellington's roads. A quarter of all trips taken in the capital are done on bike or on foot, which is the highest rate in the country. But Wellington City Council data shows of the 4,000 crashes over the past 10 years, which resulted in injuries, cyclists and pedestrians were overrepresented. They make up just under a third of all minor injuries, nearly half of all serious injuries, and 38% of all road deaths. Cycling advocates say it's a wake-up call for authorities to invest as much as possible in cycling infrastructure to make the city safer. It's 4 minutes past 5. The former Australian netball captain Liz Ellis is full of praise for the current Silver Ferns side. The New Zealanders clinched their first Consolation Cup series in 9 years with back-to-back victories over the weekend. Ellis, who won 3 World Cups and 2 Commonwealth Games titles with Australia, says the Ferns certainly have a winning mentality.
They remind me of the Australian teams that I played in the late 90s, which was you didn't care or it didn't bother you where you were at in the game, whether you were 5 down, 6 down, 7 down. You just knew that you would come back and that you would win the game. And I look at them and I see that confidence and that belief.
Liz Ellis. The New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko has backed up her good start to the LPGA Tour season after a second-place finish to open her 2021 season last week. The former world number 1 has finished tied for 8th at the Drive On Championship in Florida. Meanwhile, 2-time men's major winner Brooks Koepka has withdrawn from this week's Players' Championship due to a knee injury. Manchester City's 21-game winning streak has come to an end, beaten 2-0 by rivals Manchester United. City's first defeat in all football competitions since November narrows their lead over United at the top of football's English Premier League to 11 points with 10 games remaining. A flawless rookie collector's card of the late NBA basketball star Kobe Bryant, considered one of the rarest in existence, has sold for $2.5 million. That's the news.
Another day, another case, and more complacency.
Because you go outside during level 2 or even level 3 now, and it doesn't really look any different than level 2 or level 1.
As more toxic waste is found around PY Point.
Between about 4 and 12 kilos of cyanide a day were being discharged this way into Fovo Strait, and this has been going on for years.
And an Iceland volcano looks set to blow.
More like a bubbly lava river than an explosion of anything flying through the air.
On air and online, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
The short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, Coromandel and Central High Country. Generally cloudy with a few showers, clearing tomorrow afternoon or evening. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, fine spells. Cloud increasing about eastern Bay of Plenty and Gisborne from tonight with isolated showers developing. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Kapiti and Wellington. Mainly fine, morning and evening cloud tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, mostly fine. Showers about Dunedin and Clutha clearing today, high cloud tomorrow. Southland, cloudy at times, showers clearing today, patchy rain tomorrow night. Bulla and Westland, a few showers north of Hokitika, fine elsewhere today, the odd shower tomorrow, then rain in the south at night. Fiordland and Stewart Island, a few showers today, rain tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy, possibly thundery, easing tonight. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Enough Pfizer for everyone. The government's revealed it's getting another 8.5 million doses. Combined with what it's already got, there's sufficient for 5 million people to get the 2 jabs needed. Jacinda Ardern says the decision to make Pfizer the country's primary vaccine provider is based on the fact the vaccine is around 95% effective.
Whilst the Pfizer vaccine does need to be kept at ultra-cold temperatures, this challenge is offset by only having to deal with one vaccine rather than multiple vaccines with multiple protocols. It will simplify, in some respects, our vaccine rollout. It has the added bonus of being the first vaccine to have gained MedSafe approval for use here in New Zealand as well.
Meanwhile, 14 Air New Zealand crew are being retested and made to isolate after a flight attendant was found to have COVID after arriving home from Japan. The crew member is in the Jet Park quarantine facility and her family members have all tested negative and are isolating at home. Air New Zealand Chief Medical Officer Dr Ben Johnston joins me now. Good evening, Doctor. How's the flight attendant doing and are there any more cases among your crew members?
Good evening, Lisa. The flight attendant's doing very well. I've spoken with that person earlier today. They're completely well. And so far, no additional cases. The additional 14 people you referred to are all in isolation. The majority of them test results are back and are negative, although some are still awaited.
Are they going to have to stay at home for a second test, or is that it? Once they get the first negative, are they out and about?
No, I understand that they need to have further testing after that. That's under the control of public health authorities who direct these investigations and control of these contacts. But I understand they will have further testing.
OK, if we can just look at the case of the flight attendant, right? So they arrive home. They're not from what's considered to be a high-risk route. So what? They get a quick health check and that's it? They're free to go, no isolation, no nothing?
So, yes, they're permitted to go home. They have to comply with the surveillance testing requirements. So they had a test on arrival and then the further test on the 6th, which is where the case was picked up. But they are permitted to go home, that's correct.
So why don't all Air New Zealand crews have to at least isolate for 48 hours? It's not even particularly long or arguably onerous. So why not, out of an abundance of caution, do you not just put them all in isolation for 48 hours?
Well, because the risk is not the same in all parts of our operation. You know, we have duties that span the full range of risk, from very much nearly zero risk with our domestic operations, through to very low risk across to and from Australia, and then varying levels of risk at different ports. And the level of risk depends on the COVID risk, the COVID prevalence in that destination. It also depends on our level of confidence about that person being able to move through the airport to the hotel and stay in the hotel.
But that hasn't been borne out, has it, Doctor? Because the fact is that this person is infected and was coming back from Japan, a country that wasn't considered to be high risk. So they've still got COVID. So why not put them all in isolation for 48 hours?
Well, I think it has been borne out. In the last 11 months, we've had 3 cases in aircrew. 2 of those were in people who were in isolation hotels at the time it was picked up. And just to put that in context, over that period of time, there's been more than 5,000 international flights operated. So the numbers or the risk we're talking about here is incredibly low.
We are constantly told it only takes one, though. So I understand that your crews, when they're offshore, that there are strict rules during the layovers. So how do you audit compliance? How do you make sure they are, for example, staying in their rooms, not going out for meals? How do you trace their movements? How do you check in?
Sure. It's not possible to directly trace movements exactly, but we do keep in regular contact with our air crew. We make sure they're fully informed. We ask them to sign declarations showing that they understand what their obligations are. We ask them to do that regularly. We regularly refresh them on their obligations, and of course we always look very deeply into any event such as this. We take an event like this very seriously. In this particular case, this flight attendant has been incredibly diligent in what she's done. She's not only followed the requirements to the letter, but really gone above and beyond. She's done things like taking her own food with her, taking her own cutlery, taking her own glass to drink from. Incredible level of diligence, really. Our crew take this very, very seriously. And so far, we just haven't been able to find a clear event which caused this transmission.
Do you have a working theory?
No, right now I don't. And I'd be very interested to see the results of the genomic testing when they hopefully come back tomorrow evening, because I think that'll be a very helpful piece of the picture.
What input does Air New Zealand have in the risk designation of the locations? So there's only two that are considered high risk at the moment, San Francisco and Los Angeles. So how much say do you have in those risk assessments?
The decisions are made by Ministry of Health and the rules are made by them. They do consult us about the operational and personal welfare impact of those. And also, if they're redesigning rules, they consult us about the detail of how those might be applied. But ultimately, New Zealand's not involved in the decision.
Do you reckon that needs to be reviewed, the number of designations that are high risk?
It's reviewed continuously.
Do you think more places need to be added to that list?
I don't at the moment, no, but I think this is a dynamic thing and we're always keeping an eye on what's happening out there around the world and continuously reviewing that question.
Then you would be aware, if you're keeping a watch on everything, that Japan has had a national emergency since January. It still exists in Tokyo and will do until March 21st, and there's been more than 8,000 deaths. Doesn't that make it high risk?
So the daily cases have dropped off very significantly in Japan. I did have a conversation with the Ministry of Health back in January and asked that question. The risk designation is decided not only on the prevalence in the port, but also, as I mentioned before, the level of confidence we have around keeping our crew separate from the local population. So there's more than one factor involved.
We're almost out of time. I just want to ask you two things. The Prime Minister has said there is friction between health needs and the need to keep freight lines open. So could Air New Zealand keep flying the routes with the frequency that you currently are if you were required to put all international crew into 48 hours of managed isolation when they got home?
I don't think I have that answer at my fingertips. Being the Chief Medical Officer, that's sort of more of an operational question. It definitely would be a question that we'd need to think about, but I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
Sorry.
And the final thing is, when your crew do go into managed isolation for 48 hours, who picks up the tab for that?
For the hotel?
Yeah, all the costs associated with it.
So the cost for the crew isolation hotel is covered by government. I believe it's MB. Right,
so they cover the entire cost. You don't contribute anything towards that?
I don't know the details of that, sorry. I just know generally that the accommodation is paid for by MB, but I don't know a great level of detail.
And everyone who has to isolate for 48 hours, do all of them go to a hotel, or are some of them allowed to isolate elsewhere?
So all of the high-risk destinations, the crew all have to isolate in a hotel, and they all isolate in the same hotel.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Air New Zealand's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Ben Johnston. It is almost 17 minutes past 5, I'm getting ahead of myself. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, joins me now. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
So, another bulk purchase with Pfizer. Why have you decided to go with that as the main vaccination for New Zealand? What are the advantages?
Well, there's a real set of advantages to having one vaccine that's the mainstay of your campaign. It means that we can train people up to administer that vaccine. It means we can negotiate a secure delivery schedule with one vaccine supplier. It gives us a degree of certainty around that. It means that everyone's getting the same vaccine, so there's equity there. You know that the Pfizer vaccine is a highly effective vaccine, 95+%, effective based on the studies that we've seen to date. That should give us, that does give us confidence that this is a really good vaccine and really suitable for New Zealand.
Moderna has similar efficacy rates, though, and that would spread your risk, arguably, having more than one. So why put everything in one basket? Aren't you a little concerned about that?
Well, Moderna is the same type of vaccine as the Pfizer vaccine, so it's an mRNA vaccine. Ultimately, we get some advantage through having a single supplier that we're working with. They have been
a price really advantage, hard. Minister. Is there a price advantage?
Ultimately, our negotiators were out in the market. They were weighing a variety of different factors, including the ability to supply, the price of supply. All of those things were in there. We've got a good, robust deal with Pfizer, and they are at the moment delivering slightly ahead of schedule in terms of what they're sending through to New Zealand. So they're working very hard to make sure that they're, getting the vaccines to us so that we can get our campaign underway.
But just to be clear, you mentioned price there. So are we getting a better deal because we're buying, in essence, in bulk? What is bulk for us? So you're getting a cheaper deal?
But I was not personally involved in all of those negotiations, but we made the decision at the early part to spread our portfolio across 4 different vaccines. So we had an advanced purchase agreement with Pfizer. Pfizer then came back and said, through those discussions that we were having with them on an ongoing basis, that we could negotiate for additional vaccines. We decided to take up that option because we know it's a good vaccine. We know that we're geared up to be able to deliver it here in New Zealand. It gives us certainty. It means we can get on with it.
You mentioned equity there. Were you concerned that people might be uncomfortable with the fact that they could end up with a vaccine that wasn't as effective as other ones we've also ordered, that they might kick up?
Well, look, we want to make sure that we're giving people the best vaccine that we possibly can, and we're really confident through our existing approvals process, through the evidence we're seeing from abroad, that Pfizer is an incredibly effective vaccine.
But Minister, sorry to interrupt. If you mixed and matched the vaccines that you were getting, some of them have much lower efficacy rates. You would have then been faced with the decision, would you not, of deciding which members of society get the less effective one and which ones get the better one. Would that not have created some problems for you?
Oh, look, absolutely. The fact that we can deliver one vaccine to everybody that we know is a very effective vaccine, that was certainly very attractive to us.
So were you worried about the implications of inequity in handing out the vaccine if you couldn't get all of the supply you needed from one operator?
We started the discussions with Pfizer about the extra supply around 4 or 5 weeks ago. At that point, even, some of the evidence, the base about the effectiveness of other vaccines wasn't as certain as it is now. And it was actually, at that point, Pfizer was certainly looking to be one of the best vaccines on the market. It still is. So I think it was still a good decision for us to go with it. Now, the effectiveness, research around some of the other vaccines has been improving over that time. So I don't want to discount, how good those other vaccines are. In fact, all 4 of the vaccines we've bought, the evidence is stacking up really, really favourably for all of them. But actually, the Pfizer vaccine, we have the opportunity to use one very effective vaccine. It's been through our approvals process. There will be efficiencies that we gain by using one vaccine rather than multiple different vaccines. So it was a good decision for New Zealand.
It does have some extreme temperature requirements, right? And we've got limited number of fridges. So, are you going to be rolling out sort of the medical equivalent of the Mr. Whippy van to get it to 4 corners of New Zealand, or what's going to happen?
Well, one of the things about Pfizer is you can bring it up to a warmer temperature, still a cold temperature, but warmer, for about 5 days, or for 5 days before you'd have to dispose of it. So providing we're getting our supply lines right, which we're working very, very hard on, and we've got the private sector intricately involved in that process to bring in their expertise, we can manage a sort of a hub and spoke model where we're keeping it at an ultra low temperature. We're bringing that temperature up as we're distributing it, but we're working really hard to make sure that we don't waste any. So we don't want vaccines sitting in a freezer somewhere for more than 5 days where they then have to be thrown out. We're making really certain that the way we distribute it, we're distributing it just in time, so that it's used very, very quickly, and therefore we're getting the best use of it.
When we last spoke, you said that part of the reason you couldn't release a full list of the vaccination priorities in order was because there were multiple vaccines coming into the country with different efficacy rates, and that needed to be factored in. You now are using one vaccine for the entire population. So can we get the list now?
Yeah, we'll be releasing the sequencing framework on Wednesday.
Is it ready now, though, Minister? Are you just holding off releasing it so you can do it with a bit of a fanfare and a media stand-up when you've got it now? Could you not release it now?
No, there's just a few things that had to be finalised. We got the final agreement with Pfizer last week, and so this has had a significant bearing on the decisions around the sequencing framework, because moving from 4 different vaccines to one vaccine and the delivery schedule that goes with that was a significant piece of the puzzle that we needed to get in place.
Where are the Black Caps and the Olympians going to be on that list? Are they going to be given priority over just ordinary New Zealanders?
No, we are looking, of course, at whether there are additional groups, the people who might have to travel if they are representing New Zealand. No decisions have been made about that, but we'll set out the sequencing framework on Wednesday. Everyone will be able to see where they fit within it.
What about MFAT staff? I know some of them are heading back off overseas actually this month, some of them. So are you going to offer them vaccinations before they go to countries that have higher risks than New Zealand?
Where there are, they have to travel, and we're talking a very small number, we would look to accommodate that.
Are you guaranteeing those staff vaccinations before they leave the country?
In some cases, will be a requirement for them to be able to travel to other countries abroad. They are representing New Zealand. Like I said, we're talking about a relatively small group of people here. We will be looking to make pragmatic decisions about that.
And when do you expect to have made those decisions by?
Well, look, case by case. We're not creating blanket rules here and blanket exemptions here, but we will look at things sensibly to make sure that we're keeping people protected where they have a need to be.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. We're keen for your feedback on that. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Where do you reckon you should be in that list of priorities that's going to be released, according to the Minister, on Wednesday? Claims of suicidal thoughts, racism and confirmation the royal coffers snapped shut for Prince Harry and Meghan a year ago. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex laid bare their version of events in a 2-hour sit-down interview with Oprah Winfrey. They told the US chat show host someone in the royal family expressed concern about how dark Archie's skin would be, and at one point Prince Charles refused to take Harry's calls.
In those months when I was pregnant, all around this same time, so we have in tandem the conversation of he won't be given security, he's not going to be given a title, and also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What?
And
who is having that conversation with you? What?
So,
there is a conversation. Hold up.
There's
Stop
several
right now.
There's several conversations.
There's a
about
conversation with you,
with Harry,
about how dark your baby is going to be.
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh.
The couple also revealed they'd actually married in secret 3 days before their televised wedding, and they're expecting a baby girl. In the lead up to Harry and Meghan's wedding in 2018, entertainment correspondent Sean Mandel spoke to Meghan's father, Thomas. Now, Sean joins us live from Los Angeles. Sean, there was, bombshell after bombshell in that, wasn't there? What were some of the things that really stood out for you? Because here in New Zealand, not everyone has seen this yet.
That's right. I had to actually make a list to try and keep track of them because there were so many. The biggest bombshell, I think, of course, is the fact that Meghan says that she was considering suicide. She had suicidal ideation during her pregnancy with Archie, and it seems potentially afterwards, there was some confusion about that timeline, but that she said she thought it would be better for everyone if I wasn't here anymore, and that there was one night in particular where she didn't want to be left alone. Harry was going to an event and he told her to stay home. She didn't want to be left alone because she was afraid of what she might do. And again, this is all while pregnant with Archie. And then the other big revelation, of course, is the clip you just played, which is that there were several conversations, she says, within the royal family, some people talking to Harry, not to her directly, expressing concern about what the color or the shade, I guess, of what Archie's skin might be when he was born. And again, as she said, what that might mean.
She repeatedly talked about the institution or the firm and not being protected, and people from the institution and the firm. Who does she actually mean when she lays the accusations at their feet? Who's she talking about?
That's an excellent question, and it's an important point to note, because she doesn't name names, right? She talks about in these sort of broader generalities. She does talk about comms at one point, which is fair to say that this is most likely her press team at Kensington Palace, who were also Prince William and Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge's press teams at the very beginning. They didn't have separate press teams. So this would have been Jason Knauf. Now, Jason Knauf is the individual who wrote the HR complaint that sent it up along to the head of HR at the royal household, and even involved Prince William's private secretary in that. That was just revealed this past week. So we have to imagine that he is one of these individuals. He's one of these so-called men in gray suits that are often talked about, even though, he's an American also, which is interesting, doesn't get talked about a lot. And he's also very young. He's of the same generation as Prince William and Meghan and Harry.
The other thing is, while she was making these allegations, revelations, claims, call them what you will, not a bad word was spoken regarding the Queen, though, was there, Sean?
No, and I think that was very purposeful and very pointed. In fact, Meghan spoke glowingly about the Queen, and Harry even actually went so far as to deny some of the, tabloid headlines that came out last year around quote unquote Megxit, saying, one of the most famous ones was they didn't even tell the Queen, right? I think, everybody remembers sort of a variation of that headline, and he's flat out denying that is the case. And they're sort of pivoting back to a point that they talked about before, which is that these talks were going on for years, but I do think they kind of skirted the issue of, did they tell the Queen that they were going to post that post on Instagram on that day, on that time? There's still I have questions about that. But yes, Meghan spoke very glowingly about the Queen and about her official royal engagement that she did with the Queen right after the wedding. So really beautiful anecdotes. And also she said she called the Queen right after Prince Philip went into hospital the other week. So they do seem to be in constant communication, which is at odds a bit with everything else that we're sort of seeing and hearing in that interview.
And what about Kate Middleton?
Yes, this is what I have as probably my third biggest bombshell in the interview. There was a story that came out several months after the royal wedding that Meghan was responsible for making Kate Middleton cry over a bridesmaid's dress that Princess Charlotte was going to wear for the wedding. Now, Meghan says that not only is that not true, that quote unquote the reverse is true, meaning that Kate made her cry in the run-up to the royal wedding. As you mentioned earlier, I was working on a story around that same time, those few days when Thomas Markle, her father, was not going to be attending the wedding. She was under a lot of stress. And in the interview today, she talked about how a lot of members of the royal household and family and friends were all there basically kind of doing whatever they could to make life easier for her. Sorry about that. To make life easier for her. And she felt that Kate, Kate apologized, brought her some flowers later, but she wouldn't go into what exactly had happened.
The thing is, how do you think she came across in this? Because there was the big disclaimer at the start of the interview from Oprah Winfrey saying, you're not getting paid for this, you haven't seen the questions, all of which Meghan confirmed. So how choreographed do you think this was, and how did she come across, in your view?
I don't think it was as choreographed as I thought it was going to be, I have to say. I do think that Oprah, would have probably insisted on not showing her cards ahead of time, because otherwise it just doesn't seem like it would be something that she would risk her own credibility, right? Came across very well. I think that also, because she was talking so much of her personal struggles, I don't think anybody can listen to that interview and hear a woman talking about seriously considering taking her life and feeling and asking for help as well. This is another point I should have brought up earlier, which is that she said that she went to the firm, to the monarchy, asking for some sort of help, implying that she wanted to check into some sort of like mental health institution or hospital or, center to get additional help, because she had never felt like this before. And what she was saying was that that was turned down point blank, that she couldn't do that because of who she was. So I don't think you can listen to, I would be stunned if even her critics would listen to this and not have some empathy or some compassion for this woman who, regardless of, she admits her naivete about going into the royal family. And that's a fair, it's good of her to own that. And I think that that's helpful as well. But I don't think you could listen to the struggles that she had and not feel, some sort of, like I said, compassion and empathy for what she's been through.
Great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. That is correspondent Sean Mandel joining us there from Los Angeles, where they have all seen, many people will have gathered around to watch that 2-hour interview, Meghan and Prince Harry speaking to Oprah Winfrey. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, we explain the science of the vaccine and how long it takes to have its effect. Fiji gears up to start its nationwide campaign after its first shipment touches down, and the danger of being on two wheels in the capital. And also the marine sector warns it's at crisis point. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. If you caught any of that interview with Harry and Meghan, let us know your thoughts. Or the COVID vaccine announcement, enough Pfizer for the whole team. Can you wait to get in the queue? Let us know. It's time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The government has pre-ordered enough Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine doses to guarantee that every New Zealander can be vaccinated against COVID-19. An advance purchase agreement for another 8.5 million doses has been signed, bringing the total number of doses ordered to 10 million, enough for 5 million people to receive their 2 doses. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the Pfizer jab will simplify the vaccine rollout, as all New Zealanders will have the offer of the same vaccine. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 response minister Chris Hipkins has reiterated that the Pfizer vaccine has 95% effectiveness against the virus. He's told Checkpoint he's confident supply lines within New Zealand will be able to keep the vaccine at the required refrigeration so everyone can get a fresh dose. Britain's Prince Harry and his wife Meghan have accused Buckingham Palace of racism in their long-awaited interview with Oprah Winfrey. Meghan has told her she heard of conversations speculating on how dark the skin of her baby Archie would be. She also told Oprah Winfrey that while the Queen was welcoming, Kate, who is married to Harry's brother Prince William, made her cry just before her 2018 wedding. A Kinloch farmer has been fined $12,000 for neglecting calves. Anthony Brolly has been sentenced in the Taupo District Court on 7 charges in a case brought by the Ministry for Primary Industries. He's also been ordered to pay more than $5,000 in vet costs. Brolly failed to feed hundreds of calves and did not adequately treat and prevent parasites. A person has serious injuries after being stabbed this afternoon in the Christchurch suburb of Wellington. Police say a person was held up at knife point and had their phone stolen, and the stabbing happened on a street nearby. Officers say they're working to find the offender. Those are the latest headlines. News headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for the business news now with Nicholas Poynton, who's joined us in the studio. Nicholas, let's talk about car sharing. So apparently it's on the rise, is it?
Yeah, the Wellington-based car share company Mevo, they are looking to expand throughout the country. Now, this is one of those companies that sort of works on the basis that you pay a subscription sort of month to month and you get to use their cars as much as you want. And it's been billed as one of these cheaper alternatives to traditional car ownership. You're able to dodge all the costs that are associated with depreciation, maintenance, insurance, registration, all those sorts of things, even parking, because Mevo car parks, they actually have their own special car parks throughout Wellington City, for example.
So before you go on, I just need to clarify this. You only pay the subscription fee, or then when you use the car or book the car, do you pay more?
There is a small little fee based on sort of how long you're driving for.
Gotcha.
And the company, it's been around for a while. They say they've completed about 50,000 trips last year from its users. We don't really have much to compare that to because they didn't provide us with that. But they have also gone out and purchased a Hamilton-based company called Loop for an undisclosed sum. They operate about 20 vehicles. And on top of that, it signed a $30 million deal with the Ebbett Group, and that's to supply its vehicles in the future. All of this is about expanding to other locales later in the year. The first stop will be Hamilton. Makes sense to just purchase the company there, but the apple of its eye will be cracking the Auckland market. They don't have any cars on the road here yet, but they expect to have some cars on Auckland streets sort of later in the year, closer to Christmas. There are similar styled companies like this in Auckland, so it'll be quite interesting to see if we will start to see some competition ramping up.
Are they petrol cars? They're ones?
So they have two cars that they mainly offer. One's a little VW, little petrol car. The other is an electric Audi vehicle. So they're not cheap. They're luxury vehicles, but they pitch it as a way of being, for people who probably couldn't buy these cars outright, they do get to enjoy the luxury of driving them when they want to.
It's a really interesting concept, yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to KiwiSaver then. Conservative KiwiSaver funds are not looking all that conservative.
Yeah, if your money is in a conservative KiwiSaver fund and you actually check your fund from month to month or something like that, you'd have noticed that things have been pretty bumpy of late. Conservative funds, they're often seen as the safer option, maybe best suited to sort of older people or in later stages of their life who maybe want to keep their money in a place where they're probably guaranteed more safety and security, less appetite for risk. And these funds, they're typically invested in bonds and cash assets. But due to volatility in the bond market, often we talk about interest rates, we think about the official cash rate, but interest rates, very broad term. One of the other considerations is long-term interest rates, and when they go up, the actual value of bonds go down. And I won't go into too much detail about how that actually works because I don't want to bore our listeners.
We need a flow chart, but anyway.
I don't want to bore our listeners to death. But that and other effects, global uncertainty, you're actually seeing some negative returns in some conservative KiwiSaver funds. In RNZ Business Today, we spoke to Milford Asset Management's head of KiwiSaver. They say conservative funds, always important to remember, they're not bulletproof, they just have the lowest degree of risk. And these small returns that we're seeing, they're in a relatively small period. And over the long term, the way these conservative funds are built up, the type of assets they have within them, you would expect to see sort of fewer sort of negative returns over a longer period than you would see in balanced or aggressive funds that are more skewed to sort of more aggressive assets like shares, where you'll see a high degree of volatility. But whenever we talk about KiwiSaver, I think it's always a really good time to sort of bring up about whether or not you are in the right type of fund. Because when I was going through the story today, one of the things that really just makes you worry is that young people who find themselves in a default fund see negative returns when younger people, they've got their whole sort of financial earning careers ahead of them, probably a high propensity of risk. So it just raises the question about, is the scheme really working for them? Should they rather move to something like a more balanced or aggressive fund and probably see those better returns in the longer run? Earlier this year, we talked about some research from Morningstar. They sort of go through all the KiwiSaver funds. On average, I think conservative, off the top of my head, the aggressive funds see on average returns about 9% a year, whereas conservative funds somewhere in around about 2%. So there is quite a difference there.
So basically the message is don't fall asleep at the financial wheel.
Yeah.
Keep checking in.
Keep checking in, and
get
also
some advice.
it's something you've just got to think about your long-term investor goals. And it's where you are at your life. It's always just working out what is your appetite for risk.
And what numbers do you bring us, Nicholas?
Oh, the NZX is down 95 points to 12,180. The dollar is at 71.5 US cents, 93 Australian, and Bitcoin, it's about 70,312 New Zealand dollars per Bitcoin.
Wowza. Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news there. There's no reason to fear the COVID-19 vaccine. That's the message from experts after an Air New Zealand crew member was diagnosed with COVID-19 days after getting the vaccine. The Ministry of Health says they can't have caught the virus from the vaccine as it doesn't contain any live, dead or deactivated virus. Chen Yu found out how the vaccine works.
The COVID-19 vaccine rollout is well underway, with thousands of frontline workers having received their first jab. But vaccinologist Helen Petusis-Harris says it doesn't offer instant protection.
You're not actually protected straight away. It does take time, and certainly at least a week. And you're actually not going to see full protection until at least a week after your second dose.
The second dose is given 3 weeks after the first dose, so it takes about a month for a person to have at least a 90% protection.
It's not an instant magic bullet. And also, there's always, when you've got lots of virus out there, there's also the chance that it will still slip through. But I think we're going to see this making a big difference. So most people who get the vaccine will be protected.
The Air New Zealand crew member flew in from Japan on February 28th and tested negative for COVID. They received their first vaccine on the 3rd of March. 4 days later, they returned a positive COVID-19 result. The Ministry of Health says the most likely scenario was that this person was exposed overseas and was either incubating or infectious with COVID-19 before being vaccinated. Everyone who was at the vaccination site at the same time are being tested and isolated. Dr. Fran Preedy is the Clinical Director of Vaccine Alliance Aotearoa at the Mellaghan Institute. She says there's no evidence the vaccine will hurt people who have already got the virus or cause infection. But if you do catch the virus after getting jabbed, your symptoms might be less severe.
It does look like they tended to have less symptomatic disease, but still not a lot of information yet on that. That's just early data.
New Zealand's first COVID-19 vaccine is made by Pfizer and BioNTech. She says there is good safety data and careful scrutiny of the vaccine.
New Zealanders should definitely take advantage of these products that they're going to be the answer to winding down the epidemic worldwide and opening borders and getting back to some level of normalcy. So we should not get waylaid by each individual case that comes up.
Microbiologist Dr. Susie Wiles says there are uncertainties around how effective the vaccines are against different variants and the number of doses required.
I guess what's happening around the world is, there are countries that have got high amounts of the new variants circulating who are also doing a lot of vaccination. And so hopefully we'll find out from those countries just how effective the new vaccines are.
She says while the vaccination is being rolled out, people should still keep up with good hygiene practices.
We'll need to keep up with many of the other kinds of things that we're doing, like wearing masks and various things like that for a while yet.
Research by Massey University shows more than a third of New Zealanders are vaccine enthusiasts, a quarter are supporters, and just under a quarter are hesitants. Just over 10% are skeptics. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi nei ko Chen Liu tēnei.
Fiji's government is beginning to focus on its public vaccination campaign. Over the weekend, 12,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine touched down, making Fiji the first Pacific Island country to get vaccines through the COVAX scheme. Since the AstraZeneca vaccine requires 2 doses, the government says 6,000 frontline workers will be the first to get the jab. But as Christine Ravoy reports, now that the vaccines are rolling in, the real work begins for the government to convince the public to join its vaccination campaign.
At least 600,000 Fijians need to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama says this is crucial for the government's plan to reopen its border and revitalise the already depleted economy. Fiji has 7 active COVID cases, all in border quarantine, and Mr. Bainimarama says the country has not had a case outside of quarantine for 320 days. He says the arrival of the vaccines is timely.
It's a small step, but an important start towards protecting Fijians from a plague that has claimed more than 2.5 million lives around the world. These first jabs most certainly belong to the arms of the frontline workers who put their health and well-being on the line to keep the rest of us safe.
Bainimarama joined other delegates from his government, the UN agencies, WHO, the EU and bilateral donors to mark the historical event. Due to COVID restrictions, only about 100 people were allowed at Nadi Airport. The deputy head of the European Union in the Pacific, Eri Yaskola, says the vaccine delivery is part of a first wave of arrivals that will continue in the coming months.
The COVAX facility is a great illustration of global solidarity and multilateralism in action. The European Union is proud to be here today to witness this historic moment. Team Europe, consisting of the European Union, its member states, and the European Investment Bank, we have contributed more than 5.4 billion Fijian dollars into it.
Fiji is expected to receive more than 100,000 doses of the vaccines this year. The head of the UN Children's Fund in the Pacific, Sheldon Yett, says he's confident Fiji has the capacity to store the vaccines.
We know that Fiji has a storage capacity. We've done, together with our partners in the World Health Organization, an assessment of cold chain facilities, and we're very confident about that capacity.
Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama says the challenge now is to convince his people to join the vaccination campaigns.
No one should forget how serious this pandemic continues to be. They certainly should not pretend it does not and cannot affect us. We must not become an island of vulnerability. The only way we can ensure every Fijian's health and well-being is to see our people vaccinated along with the rest of the world. I want everyone to know that we will only have secure vaccines that are proven to be safe and proven to do what they are meant to do.
UNICEF's Sheldon Yett says while the demand and supply of the vaccines are growing, the UN agency is aware that poor and middle-income countries, including the Pacific, are not able to secure the doses as quickly as their wealthier nations. But he says Pacific governments have other options available to them while waiting to vaccinate at least 60% of their populations.
So the economy has been very hard hit here, as it has been throughout the Pacific, with the closure of the borders and the impact on the tourism industry. But it's really important that we don't look at the vaccines as the only measure. It's important that we continue to apply tried and tested measures to prevent and control transmission, physical distancing, good hand hygiene, and programs that are already in place to test, trace, to isolate, and to treat people.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has called for equitable access to the vaccines in all countries. The WHO says this remains a key policy objective, but it adds the experience of previous pandemics suggests access will be limited in developing countries. The WHO says despite the rapid development of 3 successful vaccine candidates, it wants wealthier nations to be considerate of their poor and middle-income countries, such as those in the Pacific. Ko Christine Ravoy, Aho.
It's 11 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, more on the Pfizer rollout here in New Zealand with 8.5 million doses headed our way. Wellington pedestrians and cyclists are disproportionately injured and killed on the city's roads, according to official stats. The data from Wellington City Council shows nearly half of all serious head injuries involve someone on foot or on a bike. Advocates say the figures are a wake-up call for authorities to create more and better cycling infrastructure around the city. Our Wellington reporter Harry Locke and video journalist Dom Thomas have more.
Despite its hilly topography and clustered street layout, more people walk or bike in Wellington than anywhere else in the country. Unfortunately, though, figures show pedestrians and cyclists are disproportionately represented in minor injuries, serious injuries and fatalities, which take place on the capital's roads. And that danger weighs on the mind of many. Take Marcio, for example, who says he cycles everywhere.
I try to be vigilant. I'm not one of those that jump a red light or go against traffic. I try to, just maintain my course, but you never know. I've had a few cases where buses or vans have taken a corner a bit too close, and if I wasn't paying attention, I could have been taken out of the road.
For others like Alex and Riva, it's enough to put them off going anywhere on a bike in the inner city.
Personally, I wouldn't find it the most safe place. Cars can be a bit mean.
Especially biking around here, it's really busy, with all the cars and stuff. I wouldn't feel safe doing that at all. Yeah.
So what do the numbers show? In Te Whanganui Atara, less than a quarter of all trips are taken on bike or on foot. But over the past 10 years, when there have been more than 4,000 crash-related injuries, cyclists and pedestrians have been significantly overrepresented. They make up just under a third of all minor injuries, nearly half of all serious injuries, and 38% of all deaths. Despite being a triathlete, even Wellingtonian Paul isn't impervious to the danger.
It's a city of tight streets that have been turned into one-way death traps. I'd like to see an Amsterdamisation of Wellington.
Such an Amsterdisation will require substantial time, effort and investment, beyond just a scenic bike path along the bays or a very short suburban cycleway. Over the next 10 years, the council is looking to spend more than $100 million on building cycleways. Deputy Mayor Sarah Free, who heads the cycling and walking portfolios, says they are looking to be creative.
The tightness of our streets is a challenge. That's why we will have to be creative. We will have to look at things like removing car parking if we're going to get that space. And sometimes we'll just have to look at alternative ways to do things too. Slow streets, safer speeds, quiet streets.
But an option to spend double the amount they've agreed on was shot down at a council meeting 2.5 weeks ago. Patrick Morgan from Cycle Wellington says to have any impact, the council needs to be ambitious.
It means the full investment in a protected network of cycleways. We've been waiting decades for this. The money from the government's there. This is a great investment for the council and it's the right thing to do.
Transitioning to a more cycle and pedestrian-friendly city is something all towns and cities should be striving for. The Climate Change Commission says for New Zealand to meet its climate objectives, it needs to cut down on private car use and ramp up active modes of transport. Active cyclist and one of the commissioners, Professor James Wenrick, explains.
If we can encourage people to use their bikes, use their feet, and have convenient ways of maybe you pop your bike on a rack on the bus and you can go somewhere and then get off again, or on a ferry, for instance, if we can just join the dots together better, then more people will find it convenient.
Wellington City Council is currently consulting on its budget plan, including which cycleway investment option they should go with. In Te Whanganui Atara, for Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
And if you were listening to that story on your radio, well, Harry and Dom's video package will go up on our Facebook page. Do check it out. The marine sector is warning it's at crisis point, with few super yacht owners booking refits because they can't travel to New Zealand to do them. Currently, the only way to get a foreign vessel here is by booking a $50,000 plus refit. But just 20 super yachts have done so since rules came into effect last winter. Now the sector's urging the government to let rich super yacht owners quarantine on board their plush vessels. Amy Williams and video journalist Dan Cook filed this report.
Auckland was supposed to be the Pacific's super yacht hub during the America's Cup, but that sank when the border closed.
You know, we were looking for a big boom on the America's Cup side, and where we're at the moment, I suppose thanks to COVID, is more we've got a lot of owners that don't want to bring their boats to New Zealand because they can't join their boat after their refit. So, you know, we've made the best we can out of the rules and regulations, and this is where we're at now.
That's Duthie Lidgard, who's Managing Director of Catalano Shipping, a super yacht support agency that facilitates about 3/4 of such vessels into New Zealand waters.
What we're seeing now, because of the borders, the owners can't come into cruise, so they do their refit and they go, right, what next? Well, we need to leave to Fiji, need to leave to Tahiti, we can go to Australia. They'll let owners in. They have a process owners and guests can fly on by private jet. There's a way they can isolate on the super yacht. They've all got their options. Yeah, we don't, sadly.
Last year, the Marine Association lobbied the government to grant border exemptions for the crews on foreign vessels booked for refits. After New Zealand's border closed, Chief Executive Peter Busfield had kept an eye on a marine traffic website as 100 super yachts heading to our shores turned around. $300 million sailed away, few have returned.
They have to have a threshold of at least $50,000 work pre-booked. And under this provision, we actually have had 20 super yachts arrive in New Zealand and 54 cruising yachts. But that's certainly well down on what our expectations were.
In anticipation of an influx in super yachts, Orams Marine invested $100 million in a big marina complex at Auckland's Wynyard Quarter, including a new 800-tonne travel lift for large vessels. Mr Busfield says without super yachts arriving, many businesses are struggling.
What we're very concerned about is actually going forward and later in 2021 and 2022, if these yachts do not arrive, then we're going to see carnage in our industry. And as an association, we're labelling this a potential crisis for many of our members, particularly in the far north and Whangarei and Auckland Bay of Plenty areas, where they've got wharves and marinas and service clusters adjacent to the waterways.
Those in the sector are adamant the key to attracting super yachts here is to let the wealthy owners in. But it turns out many wealthy owners do not want to spend 14 days in a managed isolation hotel run by the government, like this one, the Ridges. Business NZ is part of private sector discussions to open the border to high-value tourists and skilled workers and provide private quarantine options. Chief Executive Kirk Hope says the biggest barrier is ensuring there are enough health workers to support any extension to the current managed isolation facilities.
I think there's been some frustration about the availability of quarantining facilities. Particularly for people coming here for various events like the America's Cup. I think there's a frustration that there aren't other facilities available or more available.
But super yacht owners could isolate on board their vessel and New Zealand could reap the reward.
There are some real opportunities there. They won't stay for 2 weeks, they'll stay for 6 months, particularly if we are COVID-free.
Peter Busfield suggests owners could fly into Fiji and sail their super yacht to New Zealand, spending most of their 14 days quarantining in transit, with just a few days on board at Oprah.
So there is a provision in Fiji to do that, so there's an easy option for these owners and families to fly to Fiji, join their super yacht there. It will take about a week to sail to New Zealand and then spend the rest of the 7-day isolation tied up to a special isolation berth in Oprah, which is well set up for it in the far north, to complete their isolation under the guidance of New Zealand Customs and the Ministry of Health.
The Marine Association has put its proposal to government.
They have helped us to date in easing up some of those borders for those super yachts to come in for a refit. We're asking them now to go a little bit further and consider that the owner of a super yacht is part of the super yacht. To us, it makes plain sense. They own it. They should be allowed to be on it with their family. So that's the only extension that we're asking.
Mr Busfield says allowing super yacht owners into the country would make a huge difference to the marine sector. Without it, he estimates the country will miss out on 60 super yacht arrivals, each spending $3 million while here. Duthie Lidgard says super yacht pandemic plans often go further than the government's restrictions.
The boats operate like any hotel, they have a pandemic plan, they have a health and safety plan. So if there's community transmission, like now, they go into mandatory self-isolation. So just like Jet Park Hotel, all those people.
He says the sector's ready to welcome super yachts and their owners if and when they get the nod from government. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
Right, some of you are getting in touch about Prince Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah Winfrey. This listener says, Meghan and Harry got married secretly 3 days before that enormously expensive state wedding. Yep, they revealed that in the interview. What the heck? What a total waste of money. And now they complain about the royals cutting off their money. They walk away from the job. Why would they be paid for a job she wasn't doing? Royal titles? Surely you can't have one when you aren't acting as one. Another listener says, loved their wedding. wedding, but methinks that Meghan dost protest too much.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. New Zealanders will find out how soon they may receive a COVID-19 vaccine this Wednesday. The government is planning to release its vaccine sequencing framework in 2 days' time, which will identify different groups and their priority levels. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint this comes after the government reached a final agreement with supplier Pfizer last week. The country is buying another 8.5 million doses, enough for the entire population. Mr Hipkins says Pfizer is our primary vaccine provider because it's 95% effective.
This has had a significant bearing on the decisions around the sequencing framework because moving from 4 different vaccines to 1 vaccine and the delivery schedule that goes with that was a significant piece of the puzzle that we needed to get in place.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins. Air New Zealand says their flight attendant who contracted COVID-19 was incredibly diligent and went above and beyond hygiene requirements. The crew member, who arrived back from Japan, tested positive yesterday. Rules allowed her to be in the community leading up to her follow-up test, and the Auckland Airport countdown remains the only location of interest. Air New Zealand's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Ben Johnston, told Checkpoint the woman was very careful.
She's done things like taking her own food with her, taking her own cutlery, taking her own glass to drink from. Incredible level of diligence, really. Our crew take this very, very seriously. And so far, we just haven't been able to find a clear event which caused this transmission.
Dr. Ben Johnston says all of the other 14 crew members who travelled with the woman are in isolation and no further positive tests have come through. Several helicopters have been used to airlift people injured in a school bus crash near Murchison this afternoon to hospital. 5 people were injured when the bus went into a ditch shortly after 4 o'clock. The crash happened on the Shenandoah Highway near Mauruia Saddle Road. Emergency services say 3 people have serious injuries and 2 have moderate injuries. Murchison Area School Principal Andy Ashworth says the bus was taking children home from school. He says he's still trying to get information about what happened as the area where the crash happened has no cell phone coverage. A person has serious injuries after being stabbed in the Christchurch suburb of Wellington. Police were called around 4 o'clock this afternoon after reports a person was held up at knife point on Isabella Place and had their phone stolen. Police say a person was stabbed and has serious injuries and the offender is being sought. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have accused some at Buckingham Palace of being concerned about the colour of their child's skin before his birth. They've appeared in a 2-hour sit-down with Oprah Winfrey, addressing their exit from the British royal family, and accused the palace of failing to adequately support them. Meghan said she had suicidal thoughts due to the controlling nature of palace officials, while Harry said his wife's race always seemed to be an issue, even before Archie's birth.
That was right at the beginning when she wasn't going to get security, when members of my family were suggesting that she carries on acting because there's not enough money to pay for her and all this sort of stuff. Like, there was some real obvious signs before we even got married that this was going to be really hard.
Harry and Meghan also revealed they're expecting a baby girl this year who will be their last child. The head of a group that opposes abortion says a High Court case challenging new laws could bring a watershed moment for doctors. In a hearing that began today in Wellington, the Health Professionals Alliance is fighting for a declaration that the new law interferes with the Bill of Rights Act. The Alliance argues that part of the Abortion Legislation Act 2020 infringes health practitioners' rights to the freedom of conscience without interference. Chris O'Brien, president of the anti-abortion group Right to Life, shares the Alliance's view.
We don't only see this case as being a bit of a watershed one, it's also will possibly flow over into the euthanasia situation as well. So it's vitally important that health professionals generally have that right to maintain their own integrity.
Chris O'Brien from Right to Life. Official figures show pedestrians and cyclists are disproportionately injured and killed on Wellington's roads. Cycling advocates say it's a wake-up call for authorities to invest as much as possible in cycling infrastructure to make the city safer. Harry Locke reports.
A quarter of all trips taken in the capital are done on bike or on foot. But data from the Wellington City Council shows of the 4,000 injury crashes over the past 10 years, cyclists and pedestrians are overrepresented. They make up just under a third of all minor injuries, nearly half of all serious injuries, and 38% of all deaths. The council is looking to spend over $100 million on cycle infrastructure over the next 10 years. But in a meeting 2.5 weeks ago, it shot down a plan to spend double that. Ko Harry Lock, TNA.
It's 5 minutes past 6. The Black Caps can now afford a little time to think about cricket's World Test Championship final, scheduled for Lords in June. India sealed the other spot in the final after securing a home series win over England at the weekend. Black Caps coach Gary Stead says they'll be able to start some planning, but there's still the Bangladesh tour to get through first.
We've known we're going to be there for a while. It's just working out who we play. And India's, they're a great team. They have world beaters right through their team and some very, very good players as well. But it now, I guess, allows us to start some planning and thinking about that probably when we get to the end of the season.
The Bangladesh series starts in just under 2 weeks with 3 ODIs before 3 T20s. Manchester City's 21-game winning streak has come to an end, beaten 2-0 by rivals Manchester United. City's first defeat in all football competitions since November narrows their lead over United at the top of football's English Premier League to 11 points with 10 games remaining. Meanwhile, Liverpool have slumped to a 6th straight home league loss, going down 1-0 to relegation-threatened Fulham. Tottenham beat Crystal Palace 4-1 to move into 6th spot. A flawless rookie collector's card of the late NBA basketball star Kobe Bryant, considered one of the rarest in existence, has sold for $2.5 million. The card is one of just 2 in the world considered to be in black label pristine condition and is the most expensive Kobe Bryant card ever sold. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, who is legally responsible for our ice caps? Karen Scott is all for working that out before they melt. This week's cultural ambassador, Shahram Aryan, has some more sweet Persian sounds for us. Tonight, the sounds of Sima Bina. Helene Elliott imagines a Tokyo Olympics without the fans. And former New Musical Express journalist Paul Morley on how classical music changed his life. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
The short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel and Central High Country. Generally cloudy with a few showers, clearing tomorrow afternoon or evening. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, fine spells. Cloud increasing about eastern Bay of Plenty and Gisborne from tonight with isolated showers developing. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Kapiti and Wellington. Mainly fine, morning and evening cloud tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, mostly fine. Showers about Dunedin and Clutha clearing tonight, high cloud tomorrow. Southland, cloudy at times, showers clearing today, patchy rain tomorrow night. Bulla and Westland, a few showers north of Hokitika, fine elsewhere today, the odd shower tomorrow, then rain in the south at night. Fiordland and Stewart Island, a few showers today, rain tomorrow. And Chatham Island, showers, some heavy, possibly thundery, easing tonight. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen takuingwa. Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, have both slammed Buckingham Palace in a damning and at times shocking interview that's aired on US television. They spoke to Oprah Winfrey for a 2-hour special where they also revealed they're expecting a baby girl. World Watch's Max Toll has more.
The interview was almost as bad as it could get for Buckingham Palace, which was painted as an antiquated, unfeeling institution, a firm, as Meghan called it. There were some significant revelations, including that Meghan and Harry secretly wed 3 days before their lavish public ceremony, and the confirmation of a serious rift between Harry and his father, Prince Charles, who for a time wouldn't speak to his son because of his exit from the royal family. Meghan also revealed that as a royal, she developed suicidal thoughts after realising how controlling palace officials could be. She said she didn't have access to her keys or passport and wasn't allowed to have lunch with her friends. She says she asked for help and the palace ignored her.
I don't want to be alive anymore. I thought it would have solved everything for everyone, right? So were you thinking of harming yourself? Were you having suicidal thoughts? Yes. This was very, very clear. Wow.
very clear and very scary. And, I didn't know who to even turn to in that.
Meghan also told Oprah about a moment of tension between her and Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge. She recalled a tabloid story claiming she had made Kate cry and how she was hurt when Kate didn't publicly correct the story because, she said, the opposite was true.
Was there a situation where she might have cried or she could have cried?
No, the reverse happened. And I don't say that to be disparaging to anyone because it was a really hard week of the wedding and she was upset about something, but she owned it and she apologized and she brought me flowers and a note apologizing, and she did what I would do if I knew that I hurt someone, right? To just take accountability for it. What was shocking was, 6-7 months after our wedding? That the reverse of that would be out in the world.
The story came out 6-7 months after it actually happened.
Yeah.
Meghan said she felt the British press pitted her against Kate, making one a villain and the other a hero. She also discussed how the palace didn't want to make her son Archie a prince. She suspected due to the colour of his skin. She said someone in the palace expressed these concerns with Harry.
There is a conversation. Hold up.
There are several conversations.
There's a conversation with you,
with Harry,
about how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh. And you're not going to tell me who had the conversation?
I think that would be very damaging to them.
Prince Harry also spoke to Oprah. He defended his wife and said he didn't want to see history repeat itself, in reference to her suicidal thoughts and his mother's death in a car crash while being hounded by paparazzi.
What I was seeing was history repeating itself, but more perhaps, or definitely far more dangerous, because then you add race in and you add social media in. And when I'm talking about history repeating itself, I'm talking about my mother. When you can see something happening in the same kind of way, anybody would ask for help, ask the system of which you are part of, especially when you know there's a relationship there that they could help and share some truth or call the dogs off, whatever you want to call it. So to receive no help at all and to be told continuously, this is how it is. This is just how it is. We've all been through it.
Prince Harry too said he didn't have anyone to turn to for help at the palace, which is yet to respond to the interview. He said he feels for his brother and father who don't get to leave, unlike him. His final comment that time heals all things. For Checkpoint, Max Toll.
The government has secured enough of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for the entire country. An advance purchase agreement for another 8.5 million doses has been signed. The original agreement with Pfizer was for 1.5 million doses, bringing the total number of doses ordered to 10 million, enough for 5 million people. Our political reporter Charlie Drever filed this report.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the purchase marks a significant milestone in New Zealand's fight against COVID-19.
We can all take heart that we have now secured an incredibly effective tool in the COVID-19 toolkit. Our vaccine program will make a difference, but it will take the efforts of everyone to make this part of our fight against COVID-19 a success.
She says Pfizer's vaccine has been shown to be about 95% effective, which is why it's the country's primary provider. It also means all New Zealanders will have the chance to access the same vaccine. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says having only one vaccine will make the rollout more efficient.
You only need one stock of equipment, if you like, and actually one set of training for the vaccinators, whereas we could have been dealing with 4 lots of different competing needs in terms of vaccination programs.
The additional Pfizer vaccines are expected to arrive in New Zealand during the second half of the year. Ms Ardern says there are still purchase agreements in place for other vaccines.
In some cases, we'll be talking about whether or not we can delay the purchase and delivery of some of those vaccines into 2022, because of course we need to think about this program like the flu. It will be something we'll be doing each year.
She says extra vaccine options are likely to be made available for rural or isolated areas, or for certain individuals, just in case. The government is also working with Pacific neighbours on donating spare vaccines.
Talking with them around their vaccination preferences. That includes whether or not Pfizer will be a possibility for rollout or whether or not they would prefer something that has slightly fewer logistical challenges. Ultimately, though, we are committed to ensuring that any doses not needed here are put to good use because no country is safe until all countries are safe.
The Prime Minister will provide further details on the vaccine rollout on Wednesday. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Core Charlie Drever, DNA.
A group of health practitioners who conscientiously object to abortion are suing the Crown over new legislation. Health professionals who object to abortion now have to refer the patient to a doctor who can help them. The Health Professionals Alliance has taken the case to the High Court, saying the new law interferes with the Bill of Rights Act. Rachel Thomas was at the hearing.
The Health Professionals Alliance took its challenge to the new legislation to the High Court. As of March 24th last year, any practitioner who objects to abortion for religious or personal reasons must refer the patient to the closest abortion services. The Alliance's lawyer, Ian Bassett, argued the new laws force doctors into playing a part in the chain of causation that leads to taking a human life. Terry Ballamack from the Abortion Rights Association was watching the hearing from the public gallery. Outside court, she said it's important to balance the rights and responsibilities of doctors with those of patients.
There are some other rights here that need to be taken into consideration for balance, and that's the right of people to get medical care without being harassed by their GP or, their gynecologist.
She says it was a huge win when the legislation took effect last year, removing abortion from the Crimes Act. She's hopeful Justice Ellis will consider the feelings of the patient.
What we're talking about here is not just people being refused care, but being refused care in the most insulting and degrading and slut-shaming manner. It's just unconscionable.
The Abortion Legislation Act states conscientious objections must be accommodated unless it risks providing unreasonable disruption. Mr. Bassett told the court practitioners may fear their job was in jeopardy if their employer considered them disruptive. He says this is coercion.
And we'll hopefully be able to bring that story to you at a later date or perhaps put it online. It's 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hundreds of boaties are expected to be out on Tamaki Makoto's Hodaki Gulf in Waitemata Harbour this week for the America's Cup. Racing will get underway on Wednesday after a week-long delay caused by the rise in alert levels for COVID-19. Carmina Blewett reports.
Oraki Marina is anticipating boat chaos as more spectator boats will be out on the water than during the Prada Cup. Director Jason Sanchel says the marina could empty by as much as 3/4, with more than 130 vessels heading out.
Definitely, it's going to be chockers. Pretty busy through the Prada Cup and Christmas Cup before Christmas. So now that we're actually going to be seeing Team New Zealand again, it's going to be. I'm sure it's going to be mayhem. It'll be fun mayhem.
He says boaties need to take their time and be patient to avoid traffic jams.
Go slow and be courteous to your fellow boatie because there will be a lot of people coming back, and some guys feel like they need to come back quick. But if we all take our time, then it shouldn't be any issue.
One of Auckland's best-known sailors, Penny Whiting, is looking forward to the start of racing. She's taught more than 30,000 people how to sail over the last 50 years.
For race 1 of the America's Cup, I will be out there on Wednesday and can't wait, really excited.
And while excited at the prospect of racing, she also believes that speed restrictions imposed for the Cup will be enough to control spectator boats.
When we used to come in at 10 and 12 and 15 knots, it was all bedlam because the wake was horrible, little boats were rolling all over the place. Now everybody's doing 6 or 7 knots. It's really fine. It's not a problem.
One of the sights of the Prada Cup between Luna Rossa and Ineos Team UK was the large flotilla of yachts heading back after racing, then getting into line to make their way into marina berths. Coast Guard Northern Area Regional Manager Ray Burge is asking boaties to get out early on the water, keep their distance and take their time coming home.
One of the big things is when the racing's finished,
really take your time. Don't have any deadlines as such to get home by, because small boats that are going back to boat ramps are extremely busy. Larger vessels that are going back to marinas, it's going to be busy. There's going to be a lot of traffic. Take your time. Have plenty of time to just enjoy.
The Coast Guard is expecting interest to grow through the weekend. America's Cup organisers themselves say they believe there will be heaps of us who want a piece of the action on the water. So they're encouraging only people with a boat of 5 metres or longer to go out and be safe. The America's Cup official website also says that Auckland boat ramps could be extra busy, and it warns that roads around boat ramps will have limited parking. Kua Kamena Blewett, TNA.
People receiving coronavirus vaccines in Australia will soon have their place of birth and languages they speak recorded. It's to help the Australian government identify which communities are avoiding the jab. The ABC's Stephanie Dalzell has more.
Combating myths and misinformation is a key part of Antonio De Dio's work as a local GP. And it's never been more important than now.
People have been told that the vaccine will cause cancer, that the vaccine will cause multiple sclerosis, that the vaccine will shorten their life, that the vaccine will give them reactions that will kill them, or that the vaccine may be related to autism.
Dr De Dio's Canberra clinic is one of almost 5,000 that have been approved to administer the COVID-19 jab in the later phases of the vaccine rollout. The Italian-Australian GP works with a range of culturally and linguistically diverse patients, and with many potentially at higher risk from COVID-19, he's working hard to ensure they get the jab.
It's not so much a matter of forcing people into a particular form of behaviour, have the vaccine or don't have it, have this one or don't have that one. It's about giving people the tools and the information to make their own intelligent decisions.
The experience in the US and UK shows ethnic minorities have been much less likely to get the COVID-19 vaccine. So, to try to minimise the chance of that happening here, the government is going to record languages spoken and country of birth when Australians get the jab. Lucas Detoka is the acting First Assistant Secretary of the COVID-19 Primary Care Response.
We can see as the program continues what the take-up of the vaccine in different locations is and target specific areas that might require additional support.
Here's Mary Patetsos from the Federation of Ethnic Community Councils Australia.
It's really important for us to know who has been vaccinated and what the profiles of people are that are choosing to not vaccinate or are in fact just hesitant. So we really need to collect data to ensure that there's not a particular community that is just a little bit hesitant out there and who is choosing not to take up the option of vaccination at this point.
Community leaders and academics have been pushing for this information to be collected, just as gender, Indigenous background and age are already recorded. But there have been concerns that in the wrong hands, it might be used to vilify groups who avoid the jab or are particularly affected by the virus.
Stephanie Dalzell reporting for the ABC. In Australia, a new report's found the pandemic's financially hit women much harder than men. The Grattan Institute found women have been more likely to lose their jobs and less likely to receive government support. The report's release coincides with International Women's Day. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
At the start of last year, Natasha Marie was working as an airline caterer, but that ended when the planes stopped flying. And because the company she worked for was owned by a foreign airline, she didn't qualify for the JobKeeper wage subsidy.
It was a bit rough for the first few weeks while Centrelink was sorting itself out. I think it was about 2 months with no income whatsoever. So that was hard, obviously, with a little kid having to buy nappies and, all that sort of formula food and all that sort of stuff for him. So that was a bit hard, but yeah, we did get there in the end when the money started coming through with the job seeker.
Natasha Marie lives with her partner and 2-year-old son in Caboolture, north of Brisbane.
When we were actually able to take some money out of the super, I think we were allowed to take 2 lots of 10,000 through that 2020. I did take the 2 lots out, so just to kind of keep us afloat and whatnot. So yeah, my super kind of took a big hit and it hasn't gotten anything for over a year now.
And do you worry about that for your future?
Oh, I do, but I try not to think about it. That's a later date sort of thing to figure out.
Danielle Wood is the chief executive of the Grattan Institute, which has studied the impact of the COVID recession on Australian women. She says Natasha Marie isn't alone.
Well, we saw at the height of the lockdowns that women lost jobs and hours at a much faster rate. So in April, 8% of women lost their jobs. 12% reduced their hours, whereas the equivalent figures for men were 4% and 7%. So it was a very substantial hit to women's employment.
And although women's jobs have returned faster than others, even a short time out of the workforce can have major repercussions.
It doesn't just impact their income during that period that they're out of the workforce. It actually has a longer term effect on their earnings because it reduces their capacity to get promotions. Perhaps they're not working as many hours. And so for women in particular who already often have stop-start career paths, the scarring effects of a spell out of the workforce are actually greater.
The Grattan Institute has also looked at the federal government's policy responses to the COVID crisis. Danielle Wood says it did a great job responding to the health crisis, but the economic response has favoured male-dominated sectors of the economy.
In future, when we do recession response, we need to think a little bit beyond just supporting construction or supporting manufacturing to how can we support jobs across the economy, including in those services sectors.
The Grattan Institute says an increased focus on childcare would bolster women's jobs and prospects.
Getting care accessible and affordable is going to be incredibly important for women participating in the workforce, for women participating in study. Those will be the ones that are hopefully training in some of these jobs of the future that we're going to need.
And that was Rachel Mealy with that report from Australia. The Netherlands is still seeing thousands of new coronavirus infections each day, yet more than 1,000 fans have crammed in to a dance music gig. It's part of an experiment to see whether large-scale gatherings can take place without becoming super spreader events. Anna Holligan has more.
1,300 fans inside one concert venue within a country still living under lockdown. Everyone who managed to get hold of a ticket had to show a negative COVID-19 test taken within 48 hours of arriving and have their temperatures taken at the door. And inside, the guests are split into 6 separate bubbles. Their movement and contact with others are measured electronically. Each group has to follow a different set of rules so the results can be compared. Some have to wear a face mask at all times. Others, never. Some can visit the bar or grab a bite to eat whenever they fancy. Others, only before the interval. Some have to stay 2 metres away from each other. For those in the most relaxed bubble, the pre-pandemic social distancing rules apply. The researchers are working with the local health board and have the Dutch government's support. 5 days after this concert, everyone here will be tested for COVID-19.
Of course, we have to take our responsibility, but we're human beings. We need to let go. We need to socialize, and it's very important to keep our mental health there. So hopefully we can show governments around the world we can make this happen.
If there's no notable increase in the infection rate among those who've been here, it will be considered a success. And this model could be exported to kickstart similar events all over the world.
While some of you getting in touch with some strong opinions regarding the interview with Prince Harry and Meghan, that's the one that Oprah Winfrey did, 2 hours long, some big revelations there, accusations of racism within the so-called firm. Leslie has said the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are both in their 30s. If they haven't learnt by now that life isn't fair, they need to look at themselves without the rose-coloured glasses and get their feet on the ground. They live in a multi-million-dollar mansion with a multi-million-dollar income. Millions of others don't have jobs and don't know how they are going to be fed by their families. Roger has also been in touch and says, basically Harry and Meghan now make their living from being celebrities. To keep on generating income from their celebrity status, they have to keep on feeding the public's desire for gossip. Their interview with Oprah should be seen in that light, and that's Roger saying that. And if you didn't catch that interview, obviously it has has run in America 2 hours long. Harry and Meghan claim that discussion was had about Archie before he was born, discussion over what the colour of his skin may be and how dark he might be. Also, Harry declared that they had been cut off from the royal coffers for more than a year now, and at one point his father, Prince Charles, was refusing to speak to him. On the subject of vaccine, this listener says, we are seeing a lot of leaks through the border. When we hit flu season, these leaks could be fatal. There is a huge need to get the population vaccinated as soon as possible. And on cyclists in Wellington, this person says, Ian says, how many pedestrians and cyclists in Wellington cause their own head injury accidents versus those caused by vehicles? You can't road engineer against stupidity, says Ian. Back to
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. New Zealanders will find out how soon they may receive a COVID-19 vaccine this Wednesday. The government will release its vaccine sequencing framework, which will identify different groups and their priority levels. The announcement of a timetable follows government confirmations that it's now bought enough doses of the Pfizer vaccine for every New Zealander. An interview between Oprah Winfrey and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex has heard the British royal family